In this episode, we speak to a true pioneer of technical diving, Michael Menduno, also known as M2. Michael is an award-winning reporter and technologist who has written about diving and diving technology for more than 30 years. He even coined the term technical diving. Michael serves as the editor-in-chief of Global Underwater Explorers in-depth online magazine, is a contributing editor for Dan Europe's Alert Diver and XRay Magazine. He is also a staff writer for deeperblue.com. This was a truly fascinating and interesting chat with Michael. He tells us about those early days of starting to use mixed gases, learning from their mistakes, having no dive computers and diving down to deeper levels such as 60 and 70 metres on air because Nitrox was considered unsafe. We hope you enjoy this episode as much as we did. Michael's a really fun guy to be around and we had a few laughs.
Discovered the ocean, learned to dive, fell in love. Warning, Nitrox may be incompatible with scuba gear.
Here's a plan then, Michael. So all three of us in Monterey diving on the horizon.
Yeah, I like that.
I like that.
With our own threes.
Yeah, you know, all four elements.
Yeah.
Okay, so welcome back to the Dive Line. Fridge and Craig here with Michael Menduno. So Michael is a technical diving daddy, as I've been calling you. You know, the man that coined the phrase technical diving.
That's true.
You started diving the day after a certain film came out.
Yeah.
I mean, most people wouldn't want to get into the water after watching that, but you decided you were going to go ahead and do it anyway.
Yeah, so I learned to dive in Monterey, which world-class diving, Monterey Bay, Pacific Grove. And at that point, anything about the ocean was just like, oh God, I love it. And so Jaws had just come out. So the night before my first open water dive, I went to see Jaws, which was probably a mistake. You know?
You actually watched it?
Yeah, so I saw the movie Jaws the night before my first open water dive. So my open water dive was at Lover's Point in Pacific Grove. And so the whole dive, I could just do that boom, 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 boom. You know? And there were great whites in that area. In fact, a number of years later, a buddy of mine named Marco Flagg, who invented, his company was called Desert Dive Computing. And he got bit by a great white shark right in that area. He looked down and saw the row of teeth coming up, and he had a big computer. It was like the Edge, if you remember the Edge, like a big aluminum brick. He had it on his chest in his tank, and the shark sort of bit him here. So the computer actually sort of saved his life. So anyway, I wouldn't recommend that to people. It took me years before I kind of calmed down about sharks, which are really wonderful creatures, as you know.
We've got a lot of banners up here for some of the stuff that you've done, but for those that don't know you, how about you tell us all a little bit about your career so far?
Discovered the ocean, learned to dive, fell in love.
Well, it's Dave reading it out word for word of what you've done. It'll just be better coming from you.
It was actually, I feel like I was the right person at the right time, fell into the right time to just have an amazing adventure. I learned to dive back in the 70s. Yeah. When I went out I moved out to California to go to grad school at Stanford, and the ocean was there, of course. And I had grown up watching Jacques Cousteau and Sea Hunt, Lloyd Bridges, and suddenly being close. And I was always a swimmer and in the water. So coming out, I learned to dive and really fell in love with it. I got involved in a short way, a group doing these deeper dives. And of course, at the time, it was all in the closet, because back in the 70s and 80s, as you remember, 30 meters was the maximum depth you should go. There's really nothing to see below 30 meters. 40 meters, I guess it would be 40 meters, yeah. No decompression diving, that was verboten, etc. And, mostly people had single tanks, certainly in the ocean and things. So, and then here, all these people were doing this thing, doing dives beyond that, but it was all in the closet. So I stumbled onto this and was just so taken by it. And there was no information because none of the magazines would talk about this stuff. So I ended up starting Aquacorps Magazine to talk about all this, and right up there. And that helped the thing take off. We added a conference called the Tech Conference in the US originally, and then we did a Eurotech and an Asia Tech Conference to bring everyone together. And it was a big melting pot because we were all sort of learning this new technology. Really, tech diving at its essence was about mixed gas technology and rebreathers. Other diving communities like the commercial divers, of course, the military originally in the 30s got into mixed gas diving so they could go deeper, stay longer, whole history of diving right there. The commercial divers picked it up in the 1960s as oil fields got deeper and they needed to be able to work at deeper depths beyond 60, 70 meters. And so then the sport divers picked it up really out of the cave community, I would say. They were the first because they were pushing the air limits and there was more cave to go. And so mixed gas came in. And at the time I was in the computer industry, and around the 70s, 80s was the time of the personal computer revolution, right? Computers, governments had computers, companies had computers, and finally consumers got computers. And it seemed to me that was a perfect analogy for what was going on in diving. Mixed gas technology was now coming into the sport industry. So to improve performance and safety, so we could go deeper and stay longer, right? Again, the whole history of diving. So that's how I got involved with it. Ran the magazine for a number of years. Went out of business in the late mid-90s. I was at Stanford Graduate School, so and I was there in mathematics and economics. But I took a semester off and went down to Hopkins Marine Station, which is Stanford's marine biology branch, and spent a semester down there. Even though I was a graduate student in math, I was a baby marine biology student. So I actually got a gig counting snails and doing surveys for some of the grad student projects. So it was my kind of introduction to scientific diving, and an interesting thing. So I was at Hopkins. There was a local dive center called Aquarius Dive Center. And what I noticed at the time, this is sort of foreshadowing for my career, is that all the scientific divers at Hopkins did not hang out at the dive store and didn't talk to the dive store people. And the dive store people didn't know anything about Hopkins. So I ended up organizing a weekend of sharing what we do, like a little mini conference in Monterey for Hopkins and the local dive centers. To get together and share what we did, to bring people together, which then later in Aquacorps years in the 90s, I ended up doing that again.
So was that the first time that you'd actually gone to a depth that was more than recreational diving? Was that when it started,
Well, so it was shortly after that. I went on an internship. I went to work in Washington, D.C., working in the Senate as a staffer, as an economist and technology analyst. I was working with the Office of Technology Assessment in the Congress. So when I came back to California, there was this group called Cordell Expeditions. It was a bunch of Silicon Valley geeks, a guy named Bob Schmieder, and they bought a boat, and they were software engineers and divers, and they were doing essays off the coast of California, Cordell Banks, and then the Big Sur coast. There are all these deep seamounts that come up near the surface and rich marine life. So they're looking for volunteers. You had to have doubles and a dry suit. So I rigged up this crazy set of doubles with a cheater manifold, which, God, just dangerous. You would never dive that thing out. And dry suit. And I passed, I comported myself well, so I got admitted. And so we were doing these like 50-meter dive, 50, 60-meter dives, short 15, 20-minute bottom times, air diving.
On air?
On air, yeah. Because back then, this was, again, in the 80s, so there was no mixed gas out there. And they didn't even want us using dive computers. They were strictly Navy air tables, which is like another, oh my God, no gas for deco. And so I was so excited by this. I mean, it was just amazing. And there was stuff to see below 40 meters, you know? So at that time, I decided I was kind of going through a midlife crisis and wanting to be a writer. So I thought, I'm going to write about this. It was my first story. So I pitched it to all the dive magazine, English-speaking dive magazines in the US. I think I pitched it to the UK. No one would. It's like, you're not supposed to do that. You know, we're not going to write about that.
You're still not supposed to do that.
Yeah, they're still not supposed to do that. So eventually, a guy named Ken Loyce at Discover Diving in California, a magazine, national magazine, published this story. But the whole thing was like, it was Cordell Expeditions. And the whole thing had all these caveats. Sport divers should never do this. You know, never
Don't do this. Yeah.
Don't
Don't
do
do
the whole article, you know. So that kind of got me started as a writer. So actually, my writing career started with writing about diving, and I kind of went from there. But it just increased my hunger for information, and because there wasn't any, I thought, you know, let me start a newsletter to talk about this stuff. All these, and by then I had discovered the cave community doing this stuff, and in the U.S. the Northeast wreck divers. Those were the Andrea Doria people, the Wahoo, those Gary Gentile and Steve Gatto and those people. So and they were doing it as well. Deep diving. The wreckers were on air. They weren't even using decompression gas. The cave divers had it a little more together, but they were doing these very deep air dives too. People like Sheck Hexley and Parker Turner and Bill Gavin and Bill Main, all those guys. So, but mix was slowly coming in, and I think the cave diving community really adopted it first, and then it spread through some individuals to the wreck diving community.
So you started this magazine in 1990 after doing all these crazy things like diving down to 50, 60 meters.
Right.
And like you just said, so this earlier on this was kind of in the closet. So what possessed you to start writing a magazine about it and telling everyone about what you do?
Well, and we took some heat for it. I remember that first DEMA. We had big, it was my first DEMA ever in 1990. And back then it was in, when is it now? It's in October. It was in January then, the beginning. They shifted it back to the fall. And so we had signs, do you do decompression diving? How deep is deep? And I remember this group from Patty led by Al Hornsby kind of marched up, and they looked at the magazine and the signs and kind of stormed off. And people were upset by it because the idea was to keep it in the closet.
Yeah.
And several years later, in 1991 and 92, because once it came out of the closet, we had a lot of fatalities in the early days. I mean, we really lost a lot of people because, unlike, again, the military, the commercial divers that had money and discipline and authority, centralized authority, this was all do it yourself, right? So Skin Diver then went on a big rampage, actually, with a series of editorials against Nitrox, which they conflated with tech diving, and deep diving. Just say no to Nitrox. It was Bill Gleason, and I think I have the article somewhere. It's below the 130-foot red line. So, and what blew me away, we can go into that. But what blew me away was, I remember my Patty deep diving class at 40 meters in Monterey, pretty narked, etc. And about that depth were the depths that we were making our first decompressions. Several years later, we were making, 120-foot decompression stops, your first stop, 130, 110. So it's kind of like, wow, just like different world, right? And I think I had that in our deep issue. The quote was, imagine the surprise of the Patty deep diver cautiously edging his way down to the 40-meter limit, only to find a South Florida wreck diver making her first decompression stop. It would give him pause to stop, So anyway, good times, right? Yeah.
For those that don't know, DEMA is the Divers Equipment Manufacturers Association, and they put on still to this day, put on a very large show that alternates between Florida and Vegas, if I think, right. Isn't it, Michael? So just so that people understand how in the closet what you were doing was, is it not true that that anyone involved in nitrox was actually banned from exhibiting back in 91, 92 by DEMA?
So in 1991, right, Dick Rakowski, who father of Nitrox, he was a retired deputy dive director for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the U.S., NOAA. They're charged with the seas, and they developed a Nitrox program. They specialize, they had the 32 mix and a 36 mix. They didn't go in other fractions, but so he thought, gee, recreational divers should have this. So he started the International Association of Nitrox Divers in 1988. Ed Betts started Andy around the same time, etc. So Nitrox, as it grew, was getting people very, very upset. And there was a group kind of led by the Cayman Water Sports Association, who was Skin Diver Magazine was the biggest dive magazine on the planet, right? They had circulation, I think, of 250,000, which is big, but today. And but they Cayman Islands pressured them, and they went on a campaign talking with DEMA, Bob Gray at DEMA, to ban nitrox at the show. Part of the concern of nitrox, the biggest concern was that people just lack of information. There was just a lot of ignorance, so it was frightening. And in diving, there's the saying: "There's old divers and bold divers, but no old divers." It's good that we are cautious, right? It's important, so that people don't die. But so nitrox, they didn't know anything about it, and they basically banned. I have the letter to Dick Rakowski returning his deposit for his booth because it said, yeah. And so I was starting to say, so oxygen toxicity, what people were worried about, and then oxygen cleaning. That was even more a concern, that we're going to blow up things by putting nitrox in tanks and regulators. So they banned it at DEMA. We called sort of an emergency meeting, and so I helped organize with a guy, Dick Long, the founder of DUI Dry Suits, and Bill Hamilton, who figures very prominently in that. We organized the first nitrox, the Enriched Air Nitrox workshop right before DEMA. It was DEMA 1992. And the idea was to get all the stakeholders together, the recreational people, the manufacturers, and hash it out, like talk through the issues. And by doing that, they allowed the nitrox vendors to come to the DEMA show. However, in the every year back then, of course, they'd have the DEMA catalog that had all the exhibitors and the floor map. And the opening page was this huge warning: nitrox may be incompatible with scuba gear, and etc. And nobody even knew what nitrox was. So
now they want to find out.
Yeah, they open the nitrox. What is that? And then they look it up and they go see Dick Rakowski and Ed Betts and Andy, and that really got. And then by that point, Skin Divers sort of relented.
And 1991 wasn't that long ago. Was that? That's just relatively speaking, that's just a few years ago, isn't it? And now look, everybody wants nitrox, especially when they go on liverboards and things. So I'm guessing because there was a lack of information, is that kind of why you started the Aquacorps magazine? Is that to give out the information that wasn't, or seek out the information to give to others?
Exactly. There just wasn't, people didn't talk about this stuff. And there was a need for information, a hunger for information, really. So that's why I started it, and things grew. And if you look today, how, you can walk into any dive center and say, I need some Trimix and blah, 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 and no problem. But back then, they didn't even, there's other breathing gases other than air. What? So, and here we are now, and air is really like you'd only dive air if you had to. Why would any? The GUE meme is compressed air.
Breathe air.
Yeah, right. So anyway,
so we can actually still get hold of those copies of the Aquacorps, can't we? Is that?
I'm just starting to digitize, because I have a few copies left, but starting to digitize all the issues and post them online. They're all at aquacorps.online, right there on the screen. There you go. Good.
Like magic.
Yeah. So I'm slowly digitizing over time. There's still, there's certainly a time capsule of history. We had all the top, the the Bill Stones, the George Irvings, the scientists, everybody writing for it. So it's got, some of the latest thinking of the time, and so a lot of it's still relevant, though some things have changed.
We'll put some of the covers on the start of this when we edit it later on. Some of the covers that you've sent us on, so everyone can see them before we start having a chat.
I like to say too that we were the first adult dive magazine, so that because we dealt with the subject straight on, and when people said fuck in an interview, we fuck in an interview. And so we weren't really aiming for the family market, and then later we got a little wild and crazy with some of the issues and started doing a zine, art zine.
That's a common theme that you seem to have, Michael. So if you look at, I saw Jaws and thought, I'm going to go in the water anyway, and like, sod you, I'm going to do it anyway. You can't talk about deep diving on air, but you're going to anyway, and you're going to write about it. So you can't put twin sets together and put a manifold together, but you did it anyway.
There's a theme. There's a theme here. We can see. You just mentioned being the first with the magazine. The other first that I know you were involved with the very first diving training facility. That with Billy Deans, is that right?
Yes, Billy Deans. Billy is a longtime diver. He lived in Key West, had a dive store there. In the 1980s, mid-80s, I think it was 1986, him and his best friend, John Orton, went and dived the Andrea Doria. They had done trips, and John died on a deep air dive inside the Doria. He got lost and tangled, and Billy Deans ended up recovering the body. They filmed some of this when we brought on board the Wahoo. They actually filmed it. And jumping ahead, I'll come back to the story, but the first day of Billy's classes, he'd go, "Hey, we're here to have a good time, but before we get to that, I want you to pay attention." He'd play the film of his the body recovery of his friend. So, kind of give you focus the students, on what we were about to do. So, but Billy, after that incident, it was like Billy said, there's got to be a safer way to do this, and so he hooked up with Dr. Bill Hamilton and others and built one of the first mixed gas panels, sport mixed gas panels in the US, and started training people, learned to do it himself, and then started training people. There wasn't a course then. You would just come down and book a week with Billy or 2 weeks. And Key West was marvelous. Well, outside of warm, clear water, which is always nice. But there was a series of shipwrecks from, I think the first one was like 25 meters, and then 25 meters, 50 meters, 80 meters, and on down. So we could start people on, Joe's tug, actually at 18 meters, carrying stage bottles and swim around. Then you'd move to the Cayman Salvager at 30 meters and do that, and kind of work your way up and learn to analyze your gas. And then typically what he'd do before you made your first big mix dive on the key wreck was the Wilkes-Barre. It was a USS Wilkes-Barre. It was a destroyer that the Navy had sunk, and it was lying in about 70 plus meters of water, split in half, and that was our main training wreck. So the day before your first mix dive, we do a deep air dive, depending on your togetherness, to the sand on air the day before, and then you do it on trimix. And it was like, oh my God, just you got that. It really made a difference, right? So that was the first facility, and it was great. It was sort of the mecca of early tech diving. A lot of people from Europe came through to learn and exchange ideas. There was a big exchange. People would come down and they were doing something different than we were, and if it made sense, we started doing that. So a big sharing of information.
And so when was this, Michael?
So that would have been like I moved down there like the early. He started his shop, started doing these courses in 1990.
Oh wow! You still didn't have the information available or the knowledge to do some of this stuff, and you can't have had the gear either. What sort of gear were you using? Obviously made up stuff like you've just.
I mean, a lot of the gear came really out of the cave community. So it was, doubles with isolation manifolds. That came into being. Wings were available then. Dive Right. People like Dive Right were around making wings. We didn't have dive compute. We were using tables early on, and that was a limiting factor. I mean, you could mix gas, but if you didn't have tables, how would you dive? So
where did the gas information come from? Is that all military back in those days? What degree of this gas with that gas, and regardless of the table, where did the information of what you could actually breathe come from?
A couple of people. I mean, Dick Rakowski was active with the on the Nitrox side, International Association of Nitrox. There's a guy, Dr. Bill Hamilton, R.W. Bill Hamilton. He was big time in government dive. NOAA had a lot of contracts. He was a decompression physiologist. So he had worked with the government, with commercial companies, helping them to develop tables. And I think early on, he was approached by Sheck Exley, and then later, Bill Stone and Parker Turner, who ended up starting WKPP. And so Bill, even though everyone thought we were crazy, Bill said, these people got something, right? Because again, the military was going deep to rescue people from submarines. The commercial divers were going deep to work on an oil field. We were going deep to right? Because it was there, right? What's down there? Who knows? Let's go find out, right? Let's have a look. Yeah, I mean, I really feel like it's our genetic disposition to explore as humans, right? I mean,
it's in the genes.
Yeah, it's in the genes. You have the explorer gene. What is it? The R740. I forget the name of it, but there's the explorer gene, right? So Bill lent his credibility and expertise and started with these small groups. So the way back then you learned, like through Billy, or if you were part of the WKPP, you would, go where they knew how to do this, and you would learn how they did it. And then, it evolved over time. So with Billy, you came down and learned how he mixed his gas and analyzed it, and how we rigged stage bottles, and how you did the dive. And then courses really started in the 1990s. That's when Tom Mount joined with Dick Rakowski to form the International Association of Nitrox and Technical Divers. Andy had a program. Brett Gillum was involved with both INTD and Andy. And then I think in 95 split off to TDI.
Let me ask you a question about that early time. You've already touched on the fact that, unfortunately, we lost a lot of divers back then. And how did you learn from the mistakes? How was there an ability for you guys to find out what had gone wrong to make sure those mistakes weren't repeated? Because mitigating the risk when you're pioneering an industry, it is just amazing for us looking now.
Yeah,
great question. And we did do that back. I mean, now, as you know, when something happens, it's immediately hush. You don't hear anything, right? Because of the lawyers. It's hard to find out. But back then was not the case. So we started in Aquacorps in 1991. That was right before the Nitrox workshop. We just had, I think there was like a dozen deaths from summer to fall, including a famous father and son team, the Rouses, Chrissy
and Chris Rouse.
Right, who died on the U-Hoo, the U-867.
867, the U-boat.
Right. So that year we had, in 1992, we had our first tech conference, and the focus of that was safety. So after that, in Aquacorps, I started reporting on every incident, every issue, everyone who died between issues. I would personally, or Bill Hamilton did some of them. You'd hear about it. We get on the phone and do a report. Basically a report.
What happened?
Yeah, what happened? Kind of in the spirit of Gareth Locke's Human Diver, like non-judgmental, but just the facts. Like, how did this happen? Why did this make sense to the person? And of course, back then, many of the deaths were either deep air initially, and then wrong mix, breathing the wrong mix at depth, not labeling your tanks. I mean, that killed a lot of people. And so people would talk to you. So we do these reports. I recently republished all of, I think there were 40 some incidents that we reported on, and other deaths, and then other accidents. And so I just republished those in depth this last year. I can give you the link to that, but it goes through all. And that was the section of the magazine. I mean, and it was detailed, like what happened step by step and how people lost their lives. So
you guys really were pioneers, weren't you? You and your friends and your acquaintances, colleagues, you were all pioneers. And obviously, when you started Aquacorps, what I want to get to is you are actually the man behind the phrase technical diving. We're talking about technical diving now, but before you came up with it, this wasn't actually a thing, was it? Technical diving wasn't it wasn't anything. You're the man behind it.
We needed, and this is related to the fatalities, actually. So when we my first magazine, the first issue of Aquacorps, we didn't know what to call it. So we had an article from Bill Hamilton, call it high-tech diving is what we called it, or advanced diving. We were looking for words, and there was a big pressure from the recreational diving organization, establishment, because they were very concerned that with all the fatalities, the government would step in. The HSE in the UK, OSHA in the US, and at that time, sport diving, and still does, has an exemption from occupational workplace requirements. And so they were concerned they would lose that. So they didn't want us saying this is recreational diving. It's like, this, stay away. So we needed a name. So we kind of bounced around with different names. Walter Stark, who had invented the electrolung, had called it professional sport divers, but nothing fit. And I had some friends who were rock climbers and what's called technical climbing. And this is where, you're grading rock face climbs, it's a 5'11" or a 6.1. And that phrase technical just had all the right connotations to it. And so in the magazine in the fall of 1991, I started using the phrase technical diving. And right after that winter quarter of 1991, Drew Richardson, now the CEO of PADI, back then he was VP of PADI, and they had the PADI Undersea Journal. And of course, PADI was getting pressure from members like, well, when are we going to have technical diving classes, or these kind of classes? And so Drew penned an article called Technical Diving, Does PADI Have Its Head in the Sand? And it had a tech diver with stage models and an ostrich with the head in the sand. And that cemented the name, because after that, PADI, has huge reach within their journal everywhere. So after that, it was just technical diving.
You can't possibly have imagined how that had taken. I mean, before you came up with the name technical diving, and now everybody uses it in one form or another. It's TEC, TEK, TECH, technical tech. Everybody uses it now, and you're credited with that. That must make you feel pretty good.
It's an interesting thing. I'm I didn't know at the time, but So and an interesting thing, because back then there was like a hard line between recreational diving and technical. I mean, it was just like two complete different universes, right? Whereas now, and so we needed a different name for it to keep them straight. Whereas now, I really view there's just diving, right? It's just a continuum. Yeah. It's like, how deep do you want to go? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? Well, you need training, you need this gear, etc. So, but it was back then it was. Yeah, so it's kind of exciting to see where my baby is going.
I'm almost disappointed as well that you stole it from
Yeah, so funny. Yeah, so forevermore.
And that was in Aquacorps that you first printed that.
So it was actually in the fall of 1992, and so this was the first time we had the tagline, the Journal for Technical Diving. This was our mix issue. Each issue had a different theme. And, eventually it became, people accommodated Nitrox. I mean, by 1995, 96, the BSAC, PADI, they all got on the Nitrox bandwagon. And I think then in 2001, Patty launched its tech diving program, spelling it TEC. We use the K from Star Trek's Trekkies. So we started calling them, I started using the word techies. And yeah, so kind of fun.
Is Tech Clark, did he steal that? Did he steal?
Well, when I first saw his name, I thought, Tech Clark. It's like, really? You call him so? And of course, it had nothing to do with diving. It was a childhood nickname.
Okay.
The childhood that he got. So it was just coincidental. But yeah.
So Michael, for you, when you're going diving, cave or wreck?
I like wreck diving, but I'm probably more cave and reef. Again, I like wrecks, but I'm not like, oh my God, it's a wreck, like that. So I'm more like the natural environment.
We did an interview with a cave diver last week, Andy Torbett, and he said something that I found really interesting in that most cave divers aren't divers, they're cavers that get to a point that's flooded, and then therefore, we're going to have to learn to dive to see what's on the other side. And I found that really, it hadn't even occurred to me that they're cavers. And have you found the same, or is the cave systems different in America, that they're predominantly divers diving in caves?
Yeah, I mean, cave diving, as I understand it, well, they're probably early on cave diving or attempts, but was really the Brits, right, with Wookiee Hole and those places, which was caving with water. You have to deal with the water to keep going. So very different style. Whereas in the U.S., there is some caving in the U.S., but all the cave diving in Florida or Mexico is really just diving. So I think it is very different. We just ran a story by Michael Thomas, who you probably know, longtime veteran diver and a member of the cave diving group, the British cave diving group, called Meet the British Underground, about British cave diving and how different it is from cave diving in other parts of the world.
Because you've sent that, haven't you? The latest edition of the in-depth magazine. So I'll put a link on in the description down below. When we spoke to Andy Torbett, Michael Thomas and Phil Short were actually there as well. So I did notice that you've got an article from Phil Short on there as well.
Yep. Yeah. Certainly some of our giants, in this area. I mean, another nice thing about cave diving is you don't get seasick, which is nice.
And you haven't got to worry about the tide either.
That's right. Oh God. So
where's your favourite place to dive then, Michael?
God, it's probably places I haven't even been to yet. I mean, Monterey is world-class, wonderful diving in Monterey. I mean, certainly, I was just in PNG for the first time this last December, Papua New Guinea, and that was like just pristine. I mean, like nothing I'd seen, so that was really good. Mexico caves are just, spectacular and wonderful.
It's just incredible, yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing more diving, and I'd like to get over to Europe. I was in Ponza, Italy last year. That was really eye-opening, very nice diving there. So, yeah, but I kind of feel like there's all these places I still want to go.
There's a whole world of places to dive. Open circuit or closed?
I've gone back to open circuit, but I'm headed back to closed circuit now. Closed circuit is, well, they're for me, and I'm just a baby closed circuit diver because by the time I left Aquacorps, rebreathers were really just starting in the early 2000s, late 90s, 2000s. On open circuit is just so comfortable, and so chill. I mean, because whereas I found on rebreathers, and I have, like 100 hours, just baby rebreather diver, 100 hours on rebreathers. But, they're just, I love the quietness and the peacefulness. You can hear your breath. But I'm always a little anxious, just like the things could go wrong. Yeah, maybe if I had another 1,000 hours, I'd probably feel much more comfortable.
I'm surprised you haven't tried to make a rebreather, Michael.
Oh, yeah. Well, there are a lot of people who have done that. I am just personally, give me anything brain-wise or visual, but I'm not so mechanical. It's not like one of my strengths. So
you sound like you've.
I could dream up and design and write a story about it.
Yeah.
You can report on it.
It's like I'd be challenged. So
You sound like you've got a little less crazy as you've got a bit older.
I think that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maturity, right?
Maturity. Is that what it is? Yeah.
All the things that
You're beginning to learn about what you didn't know back then.
And for me, I mean, I'm a journalist, so I kind of view myself as a perpetual student.
Yeah.
And I like that. I mean, learning is what's exciting. I mean, it would be how boring it would be to know everything.
So I was just going to, you mentioned journalism, and I was just going to ask you about your involvement with Dan Europe.
Yes. So I met Dr. Maroney, who was the founder of Dan, and his daughter Laura last year in Ponza, Italy. It was the International Rebreather meeting, and I went out there. It was a great time. I think there's about 40 people, and great diving, great food. So I met them, and we got to talking. And part of what they wanted to do is, they have a Dan Europe, unlike Dan US, does a lot more research. They're very engaged in research, and so they're sitting on this treasure trove of all this, research on diving science and diving medicine, and so they wanted a way to make it more accessible. So they brought me on to start writing stories, taking scientific papers, and then kind of making an article, putting them in layman's language so you can understand how to apply it. And so I've gotten involved with them and doing other writing and editing, and it's a great group. I really enjoy it. So
is that an online publication?
Yeah. So Dan Europe's publication, Alert Diver, and they also have a blog, are just online. In the U.S., Dan U.S. Prints. They have a magazine printed by Stephen Frank, famous underwater photographer, that they produce called Alert Diver in the print magazine, which I've written a lot for as well. I've pretty much written for all the dive magazines, or certainly all the English-speaking dive magazines in the world.
So you obviously at the moment you're editor-in-chief of In Depth magazine.
Yes, and I love it. So I got Jared Jablonski is a longtime friend of mine. We've known each other from back in the day, and we started talking. And GUE has grown a lot. I think for many years they were kind of not a closed community, meaning they didn't want people in, but they were kind of kept to themselves. And so the idea was, let's create something for the tech diving community. And so Jared brought me in to create In Depth, and I'm loving it. Actually, I love writing and doing stories, but I really love editing and being able to work with other writers and artists and all. So our goal is to make this for the diving community as a whole. I would say it's got some of the elements of Aquacorps. We're not dumbing stuff down, and we're trying to really create something of interest to divers. So we have a lot of
say it how it is.
Pardon? Say it how it is. Yes, definitely. Yeah. And so I'm really having a ball with that. There's so many, we're just doing so many amazing things as a community. I mean, some of the exploration work that's being done is just, phenomenal. Lots of, shipwreck projects, diving projects. I did a piece earlier in the year. I had a chart from the Aquacorps days looking at the 10 deepest shipwreck exploration dives. And back in the 90s, so we had the top 10. I think the deepest one was the Edmund Fitzgerald, which was pretty deep, about 150 plus meters. So that's deep. But I think the average depth was, 360, 70, 80 meters, 80, 90 meters. And then we contrasted it with, I did a list of the top 30 deepest shipwreck dives today. And I think the deepest is down at about 200 plus meters. And the top 10 from the 90s didn't even make the top 10 of today. It's just so much deeper. I don't have the stats right in my brain, but yeah.
The things that have changed, the training, the equipment, the knowledge, to allow that to happen, and a lot safer now than the top 10 were back then.
Totally, yes, and more rebreathers. Back then, I think there was one rebreather dive in the top 10 because there weren't any rebreathers around. All the rest were open circuit, and now all the deep stuff obviously is on a rebreather because it's just the way to do it, right? So.
And I think that's credit to you putting that first Aquacorps out and providing that information, because without that information and someone saying, there you go, try this or do this, do that, maybe try this, that information and that knowledge has allowed people now to experience those deeper depths because it's available. It's not in the closet anymore, is it?
Right, it isn't. Yeah, and it's interesting. The whole mindset's changed because, again, back in the early days, things were just hidden, things we didn't talk about, and now everything's accessible and open. You know, the people who are doing these dives can talk about how they're doing them and why, and you know what mixes, what technology, and
well, divers love to talk about diving.
Yes, they do, and the tech divers are now driving the bus.
Yeah,
and the recreational the tourist diving sort of dominated sport diving, and now the tourists are in the back of the bus. You know, we like them. We're glad they're there. Do your 2 dives a year, great. But driving the bus are all the serious dive community, all of us. You know, the people really into this. So
yeah, definitely.
It's remarkable.
The commercial world has obviously caught up very quickly with the fact that these guys are enthusiasts and dedicated. They dive all year round. They buy the kit that enables them to be safe at those depths and are prepared to spend and invest in that kit. So from a commercial point of view, a huge proportion of the value of the dive industry has got to be owed to the tech guys now.
Yes, because we're not bigger in number. We've never had good numbers in our industry, but there were more divers in the 80s than there are now, or 90s, I think. But it's a smaller group, but as you say, you know, a given tech diver is going to have 50 grand of equipment, easy, right? Rebreather, a couple dry suits, scooter, couple computers, tanks, you know, Haskell pump, you know, whatever. So that has made a difference. And actually, even back in the Aquacorps days, because I was trying to get people excited about tech diving, we did an article about how much money tech divers spend and why would we want to consider looking at tech divers as your marketplace. So
just stop there 1 second, Jim. Can you edit all of that out? I don't want my wife listening to you a dive kit.
No, what you do, you just tell her you've bought it off eBay second hand, and it cost you 20 quid. There you go. You buy it brand new, but you tell her you bought it from eBay and get it delivered to the office.
Right. Yeah. And we have, you know, there's so many great companies too. I mean, we're all under pressure right now. I think I just actually interviewed a bunch of people around the world to get a sense of what's happening in the dive industry with COVID. And it seems like a lot of the international manufacturers are starting to do a little better because where diving is opening up, it's mostly local diving these days, right? I mean, international travel is just not happening much. So people are rediscovering their local dive sites. And I was talking to Jim Standing at Fourth Element, which makes great suits. And he was saying that, we're selling all sorts of dry suits in areas we've never sold dry suits, like in China and all, which
because people are staying local and diving in their own areas, so where they feel safe.
Yes. And, because I gave a shout out to Fourth Element, let me also give a shout out to O3, which makes an incredibly great dry suit. I have an O3 as well, and I really like it. Warm. Yeah. And
Jim dives in O3.
Yeah. I have the 2 mil. The 2 mil.
The RI2 100, is it? Yeah, same one.
It's good.
Especially made because I'm a funny shape.
You don't want to see him from below what you can see now. You don't go there. You don't want to see
O3 make custom dry suits to fit me.
Someone told me last week, they said COVID-19, the 19 stands for how many pounds or kilos, I guess, you're going to gain during this time. I fortunately have not gained that many, but I'm up there. So
Although I do dive in an O3 dry suit, if Jim Standing is listening and watching, I'm quite happy to try a Fourth Element one.
Yeah.
As recommended by Michael Menduno.
I got the Argonaut 2.0 last year, and it's a great suit.
Heard it's good.
It's a shell suit.
Only heard it's good. We've
only heard. We're working on it.
Hey, if you don't ask.
That's right. So, yeah, this next year is going to be a challenge for the dive industry. Again, just particularly dive center resorts and liveaboards. They're the ones that are really hurting because, the Philippines, Fiji, Solomon, PNG, places like that. It's tough because they're not going to see a lot of visitors this year at all. So,
we're looking at doing a lot more UK diving and staying here in the UK. And we've got so many places we can dive.
So we'll see a resurgence of local. I thought, think globally, dive locally.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
There's another title, Michael, that we haven't mentioned that I'm embarrassed to say until today I didn't even know about, and I believe you're involved in the XRay Magazine. Is it? What was the actual title, Jim? It's XRay.
XRay Magazine.
XRay Magazine. I only came across it today. I don't know why I didn't know, and I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know about it. And I had a quick look, and it looks really good.
It's a great magazine. They're published out of Copenhagen. Peter Symes is the publisher, and his wife Camille. And so I kind of work with them as helping them with editing and different things. And they're pretty global. They were really one of the first online magazines. They publish as a PDF that you can download, and then have a website as well. So so I've enjoyed working with them over the years. And then deeperblue.com as well. I write for them. Stephen Whelan, they're in the UK, and they have a lot of good things going, and including their new podcast. So
Were you supposed to be a co-host of that?
Yes, I started as a co-host, but right now I'm just really super busy, and so it was taking. I had to bow out for the time.
We know how time-consuming podcasts are, don't we, Jim?
People don't realize. They think you just get out and talk, but
I know.
Oh wow, it's a lot.
It takes a lot of work. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So
a labor of love, because there's not, except for the huge, big New York Times podcasts and stuff. There's not a lot of money in it.
Yeah, I think Mark Evans from Scuba Diving Magazine said, if you want to make £1 million in scuba diving, start with 2.
Yeah. Yes.
You'll get there very quickly.
Yeah. It's a conundrum, because most of the world's water, right? 70% of the world's water. We are the people that go underwater, and it's just tight. The whole diving industry is less than $2 billion a year, $1.5 billion a year. I mean, that's iPhone sales for a month, And so as a result, things evolve very slowly. Like a given rebreather has a life cycle of 6 to 8 years before the next gen.
Yeah.
Look at electronics. It's every 6 months. So it's very slow to evolve.
We're a very, very niche industry.
Yes,
very
exactly. Yeah.
So just touching back on the podcast, Michael, did you tell us previously, I think you told us about maybe setting up a new podcast with Dan Europe?
Dan, yes, I'm not to preempt things, but so we're in talks about having.
Should I not have said that?
But one of the things we're talking about is having a podcast again, because they have all this depth of information and knowledge, and to make it more accessible to people, like that. So that's the idea for it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so
space. Listen to this space. Yeah.
Yeah. So other than that, what else have you got coming up in the next sort of few weeks, few months, next year?
Right. Well, we're always, In Depth is a monthly magazine, so we're we're always working on that. We have some good stories coming up on that. So I'm working on that. Dan Europe, actually, we just finished up some pieces there. I wrote a piece, actually, more a commercial piece, but an important one on pro liability insurance. You know, if you're an instructor, dive master, dive center, getting insurance, which is an important subject. And Dan Europe has a really good program. So working on that. I'm working on I got a long interview. I spent about 5 or 6 hours interviewing Lamar Hires from Dive Right, who's truly one of our pioneers, explorer, certainly equipment innovation. He's been at the forefront of it for nearly 30 years. So finishing up a piece about that I'm excited about. And I've been working on a book. There's a Greek cave instructor, Stratus Kos, who's also a filmmaker, and he's got a must-read book coming out called Close Calls. And what it is a lot of the diving well-known big-time divers, close calls, mistakes they made that nearly cost them their life. And so it's riveting reading. And so I have a story in there, but also working on the forward for the book. So, and trying to get that in. So that'll be out in the fall. So that'll definitely be a must read for everybody. And I think if a big person, if a well-known high level diver can screw up and make mistakes, then we all can, right?
And isn't he the same guy in this month's edition of In Depth that busts the myths? He's busting the myths versus reality of tech diving.
Of tech diving, yes. So a really good piece there. So So we're coming up a rebreather guide. I'm doing an interview this month with a guy, Guy Shockey. He's a longtime GUE instructor examiner, and it's on high capacity divers, creating high capacity. What does it mean to be a high capacity diver? Which I think of this means, all your equipment can break 5,000 feet back in the cave, and you still, just are chill and cool and kind of work through the problems and survive the dive. So
I think it's important that we tell everyone, Michael, that you do not have to be a GUE member or part of the GUE club to be able to read In Depth online, because it is a brilliant read. It's really informative, and anyone can go to the website that you have there, Jim.
We push out the issue each month several times via email, like everyone does these days. Here are the stories of the month, and then they live on the website there. And we cover lots of stuff from around the world, contributors from all the
really interesting articles
and everything. So, So
I'll put the link to that in our description down below, so anyone who wants to click on that will go straight to it.
Oh, good, yeah. So it's pretty exciting. I think it's exciting times right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we'd love to speak to you. There's so many more things we can talk about. I mean, we've only briefly touched on the early days of that technical diving and what you did and how you, like you said, putting your stuff together, just putting twin tanks together and just, with a bit of pipe, basically, and the equipment. I'd love to get you back and talk to you again another time about those early days and what mindset you had to be in and why you thought it was a good idea to dive down to 60 meters on air on made gear that you put together in your garage, Right.
Oh, God, I know. Interesting with deep air, it's still. I wrote a piece not too long ago for Dan Europe, actually. We contrasted all the different agencies' policies with regards to deep air diving, how deep. And there's still, I got pushback from people because they said I was bad-mouthing deep air. It's like, if you don't have anything else to breathe, but it's just dangerous. So, and if there's a better alternative, it's problematic because helium prices, I gave a talk on this recently. Helium prices are going to keep going up. So I think in 10, 15 years, there's just not going to be open circuit deep diving because no one's going to be able to afford it. We're all going to get these rebreathers. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well,
I have a podcast. Here's a podcast idea for you guys. I've been thinking about this because certainly the deep divers are all going to move to closed circuit rebreathers. I mean, they've done that pretty much anyway. But why hasn't semi-closed systems taken off? You know, there have been a number of attempts from Draeger back in the 90s, Kev Gurr, you know, one of our crew pioneers, you know, your countryman, with the Explorer that was marketed by Hollis, and that sort of didn't take. And now Paul Rainmaker and Revo have the Horizon.
Yeah, and the Mauri's Horizon. I was looking at Dusseldorf show a couple of years ago, and then again January this year. And as an underwater photographer, I was really interested in that, and gave my details and said, "Oh, you know, I want to train. I'd like to." No one even called me back, and that's, you know, that's one of the bad sides of the industry, is that, you know, people wonder why these things don't work. Well, if you've got a customer saying, "I've got the money, I'd like to have a go," and you don't even talk to them, you know, go figure.
Craig, let's change it now. Now we're on this podcast. We haven't got the money, but we'll give it a go.
Yeah.
And we'll review it.
Going back to if you don't ask, you don't get. Mauri's, give us some Horizons and some training. Let's tell the world about your new kit.
No, so it's an interesting question. Why? Because I would think there would be more. You know, they're lighter weight, they're quieter. Yeah. I mean, there's bubbles, but less bubbles.
Brilliant.
It seems like it would be a natural evolution for recreational divers, but it hasn't.
Absolutely.
Really
20 kilos of weight. You can take it on an aeroplane in a case easily. All you need is a nitrox cylinder when you get to the other end. Fail-safe into nitrox, which we all dive on anyway. The idea is just superb, and it should take off. It should be supported.
Yeah. I actually wrote to Paul a couple of weeks ago to say, Paul, would you write a story about this? Like, why now? Why are we going to see everyone diving these? Why not? You know. So anyway, we'll see how that evolves.
Here's a plan then, Michael. So all three of us in Monterey diving on the Horizon.
Yeah, I like that.
I like that.
With our threes.
Yeah, you know, all four elements.
Yeah. Let me leave you with one other thing. Two other things I think are very exciting that we don't have time to talk about. But thing one, all the new data collection, photogrammetry, things like virtual reality, things like that, I think are going to really open up the underwater world to the rest of the planet.
Yeah.
And then the newest community moving into mixed gas diving are the free divers. And I think that's very interesting. Technical free diving, a term coined by Kirk Kroc with performance free diving, which was brought up by TDI recently. And so the idea is you pre-breathe mix and then you hold your breath.
Wow.
An enriched air, enriched oxygen mix, and that allows you to stay down longer. It may, we don't know, but it may eliminate the biggest risk of freediving, which is, blackout. So I think that's an exciting new area.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting.
Michael, you have got a really busy schedule, and we're so grateful that you've taken the time out to spend an hour or two having a chat with us from sunny California. Jim and I really appreciate it. Both of us would like to say thank you. Both of us really look forward to being able to do this again in the future.
Thank you both. I'm really excited to have done this with you guys. And I think we could probably talk all day long, right? Easily.
There's just so much, and to be honest, there's so many things that happen between now and next month. There'll be more happen, won't there? That's why there's online magazines, and that's why you write about these stories. So I mean, we'd love to catch up again sometime in the future. Love to.
Great. Thank you, guys. Yeah.
Michael, thank you.
Yeah.